Hey guys, in this exercise we're going to be taking a look at brush technique. So one thing about watercolors is the way that you use your brush can actually have a huge impact on the sorts of things that you're able to achieve. So for this, and you can use really any different type of brush for this because the goal is experimentation. So, if you use a different brush, you'll get a different effect. You can experiment around with that. But you're also going to want to have some cartridge paper or scrap paper, a piece of cardboard, something you can just test some of these things out on because they can look a little bit easier than they actually are. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be just doing a few exercises on seaweed and sea-type creatures in order to get used to using our brushes and to understand what the limitations of our brushes are. So for this first one, I'm going to start out with a little bit of green, the light green, and some orange. And I'm using the Analinki watercolors. If you like your watercolors to be a little bit more vibrant, just go with the green. You don't need to use the orange. And I'm going to mix up some of this green in the well so that it's a little bit transparent when I put it down. And then I'm going to start moving in with my seaweed shades. So practice this on your cartridge paper before you move on to your watercolor paper. You can use student grade watercolor papers for this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm holding the brush upside down and I'm just at first very lightly putting it against the page, then I'm pressing down, then I'm lifting it up. So I've got a leaf shape just from doing that. So again, holding the brush upside down, first just letting the tip hit the paper, then pressing down all the way, then lifting the brush up. And for this one, I'm going to press down again, lift the brush up, and press down again. I'm going to mix up a little bit more of that green. Okay, and again, brush upside down, so just the tip of the seaweed. I'm going to push the brush down, let it lift up. Push the brush down, let it lift up. Mix up a little bit more paint if you need to. Push the brush down, let it lift up. Don't worry if, like mine, it's just skimming the surface of the paper or if it's completely saturating the paper. That's not going to make a difference in the effect that you're going to create. And in fact, the variation in effects is going to seem natural. So pressing the brush down, lifting up, pressing the brush down, lifting up, and let's do one more on this side to balance it out. So pressing the brush down, lifting up, lifting up. Okay, and for the next one, I'm going to use a flat brush, but again, you can use a variety of brushes for this. I'm going to, with this green, add a bit of ultramarine to it. So this is sort of orangey, green, and ultramarine. If you want your color to be kind of dull, otherwise you can just use ultramarine. You can try using the purple for this. Really, there are a lot of options. And here, I'm going to hold my flat brush on the side and just, and again, I'm doing this straight on the page, but you're going to want to practice this. I'm going to make one swoop going this way. And the base we want to be a little bit thicker than the tip. So I'm just going to come back in and make sure that the base is a little bit thicker. Now I'm going to make a few areas that branch off, so I'm just using this dry brush on the side. Sorry, not dry brush, flat brush. Then as I move towards the top, I'm going to mix a little bit more water in there. And then I'm going to add in a little bit more green, a little bit more ultramarine, dilute, and using my brush, trying to use as few brush strokes as possible, I'm going to make the base of this seaweed shape. And these can get more transparent as you move upwards, so just keep adding water. And then I'm going to dilute that even further. Add in a little bit more green. And here, I'm just letting my brush kind of go in waves. So whether you use a round brush or a flat brush or a brush kind of with a curved edge, you're going to get a variety of different effects for this exercise. So it's just a good way to get used to what you can do with your brush. Okay, so using the flat brush, I'm going to do some coral for the next one. So I'm just going to mix up some orange and a little bit of the red. So orange and red for this one. I'm going to start at the base, so with the brush completely flat and again holding it upside down. And I'm going to make the shape of the coral. So I'm going to move up here. Then I'll have one side coming this way. And again, I'm just trying to minimize the amount of brush strokes that I'm using and just experiment with how holding the brush on its side versus flat up and down creates some variation in effects. Okay, and now I'm going to move on to a jellyfish. I'm going to be using some ultramarine and phthalo blue. So let's get that ultramarine and phthalo blue. And I'm just going to create the top of the jellyfish. If you're having trouble doing an arc, you can get a round shape, like a coin or something for the top of the jellyfish if you'd like. And I'm just creating a little shape for the base. Then I'm going to add water to my brush and just blend that inwards. Add a little bit more phthalo blue, dropping that into one side. And then with the phthalo blue, I'm going to use phthalo blue, green, some other colors. I'm going to just move from the inside out, experimenting with creating wavy shapes with my brush. And if you want, you can add some greens and ultramarines in there as well. So like if you have a fine brush, you can also use this as a chance to experiment with your fine brush. I'll do this with some ultramarine. And you can, if you want to like enhance the transparency once this dries a bit, go back over with a dry brush over the sides, and that'll just kind of enhance this sense of transparency. Now I'm going to move back to this first one, remembering I'm using that light green, so I'm going to mix up some light green with a little bit of the orange. And where each of these goes inward, so on this like thin area, I'm going to do a crescent to get that leaf folding over. So for each inward area, the leaf folds over. You don't need all of them to fold over, and you can have different sort of widths here. You can also practice like tracing some of these to see the effect that that has. Like if you just kind of do a line down the middle. And if you want, you can also put down like a vein through the seaweed, although it's not necessary. Also looks good without. Now, if you want to practice using a little bit of gouache and a bit of a dry brush technique, we can also do that on the coral. Again, it's not necessary, just if you want to. So I'm picking up some white gouache. I'm making sure that my brush is fairly dry. You'll want to practice this first. And then I'm just like scraping the brush over the surface so that some of the texture of the paper shows through. And then for some of the darker areas, I can add just like a tiny bit of purple to the orange. A little bit of red and purple, and on the sides of some of these, add in just a little bit more shade. going to return to the jellyfish now because it's getting, these colors are blending in a bit. So I'm just going to reinforce using phthalo blue and ultramarine blue the outline. And there we have it, little seaweed sampler.